Picture this. It's Friday night. You're sitting in a dimly lit room, holding a cold glass of beer. Condensation is dripping down the side. You take a sip. Your shoulders drop. The stress of the week melts away. You probably think you're just relaxing. You probably think this drink is a product of modern civilization, a luxury of the agricultural age. But you're wrong. When you take that sip, you are engaging in one of the oldest, most primal behaviors in the history of our planet. Older than writing, older than the wheel, older than the very concept of farming. In fact, your relationship with that drink, it predates the human species entirely. To understand why you crave that cold beer, we have to rewind the clock. Not a few thousand years, 10 million years. You are no longer in a bar. You are in a dense, sweltering forest in Miocene-epoch Africa. The air is thick with humidity. You are a small, hairy primate scanning the canopy for food. But you aren't looking up. You're looking down. On the forest floor, a piece of fruit has fallen from a canopy branch. It's been sitting in the tropical heat for days. Its skin is split open. Natural yeasts from the air have invaded the sugary flesh. Fermentation has begun. The fruit is producing a strange, pungent chemical, ethanol. You pick it up, you eat it, and suddenly you feel warm. You feel loose. You feel a little dizzy, but in a remarkably good way. You have no idea what just happened, but your brain releases a massive hit of dopamine. It tells you, remember this smell, find this again. This isn't just a story. This is cold, hard biology. In 2014, a biologist at UC Berkeley named Robert Dudley published a groundbreaking book proposing the drunken monkey hypothesis. Dudley argued that our primate ancestors didn't just stumble into alcohol by accident. Over millions of years, they actually evolved a genetic mutation that allowed them to metabolize ethanol quickly. This gave them a massive survival advantage. While other animals would get dangerously intoxicated and eaten by predators, your ancestors could track the scent of rotting, calorie-dense fermented fruit, eat it safely, and keep moving. Evolution literally hardwired your brain to seek out alcohol. The taste for it was built into your DNA, long before anyone figured out how to brew it in a barrel. But when did we figure it out? When did we stop scavenging for rotting fruit and start playing chemist? For a long time, historians thought brewing was a side quest of the Imperial Revolution. The textbook story goes like this. Humans settled down. We planted crops. We baked bread. And then, eventually, someone left some wet grain out, it fermented, and boom, beer was born. But the dirt tells a completely different story. In 2018, deep inside a limestone cave near Haifa, Israel, a site called Raqefet Cave, archaeologists found something impossible. They were studying the Natufians. These were ancient humans living about 13,000 years ago. The Natufians were hunter-gatherers, nomads. They chased wild game and foraged for roots. They had not invented farming. But carved directly into the bedrock of this cave, archaeologists found deep stone mortars. And when they scraped the microscopic residue from the bottom of these pits and put it under a mass spectrometer, they found traces of wild wheat and barley. This grain hadn't just been stored. It had been soaked, germinated, mashed, and left to ferment 13,000 years ago in a dark, smoky cave, before the invention of the wheel, before the domestication of the horse. These nomadic hunters were brewing beer. This wasn't an isolated incident. Once humanity realized they could control the fermentation process, alcohol didn't just become a drink. It became the engine of human progress. Let's look at how this escalated. First, it became an art. Travel forward to 7000 BCE, to a Neolithic village called Jiahu in central China. Here, archaeologists pulled ancient pottery jars from the earth. The chemical residue inside wasn't just crushed wild grain. It was a highly sophisticated, intentional recipe. A complex blend of rice, honey, wild grapes, and hawthorn berries. This is the oldest confirmed recipe for alcohol in the world. It wasn't crude, accidental swamp water. It was a craft beverage. Whoever brewed this was a master chemist, balancing sugars, wild yeasts, and botanicals. Second, it became a religion. Shift the map to southeastern Turkey, 12,000 years ago, a site called Göbekli Tepe. This place breaks the brains of modern archaeologists. It consists of massive, towering stone pillars arranged in perfect circles, carved with terrifying images of scorpions, lions, and vultures. Some of these stones weigh over 10 tons. And here's the catch. The people who built this were still nomadic hunter-gatherers. Moving these stones required hundreds of people working in perfect coordination. But why would nomads, who have to spend every waking second surviving, stop to build a massive stone monument on a hill? What was the motivation? Archaeologists dug into the site. They found enormous stone vats. And inside those vats, the unmistakable chemical signatures of fermented grain, massive quantities of it. Göbekli Tepe wasn't a house, it was a temple, and it was a temple fueled by massive alcohol-soaked feasts. Beer was the social glue that convinced hundreds of wild, territorial nomads to put down their spears, work together, and haul 10-ton stones up a mountain. Third, it became an economy. By the time ancient Egypt rises from the desert sands, beer is no longer just a drink or a ritual. It is the literal foundation of the empire. When you picture the workers building the Great Pyramids at Giza, you probably picture miserable slaves. But the truth is, they were highly skilled laborers. And they weren't paid in gold or silver. They were paid in beer. The standard wage for a pyramid builder was 4 to 5 liters of thick, highly nutritious, low-alcohol beer every single day. Think about the brutal reality of living in ancient Egypt. The Nile River was your only water source, but it was also where you bathed, where your livestock waded, and where deadly parasites bred. Drinking water straight from the Nile was a gamble with death. But beer? The brewing process required boiling the water and creating an acidic environment where bacteria couldn't survive. Beer was a water filter. It was a medicine. Doctors prescribed it for everything from stomach aches to open wounds. And for a laborer hauling multi-ton limestone blocks under a blistering sun, beer was lunch. It was packed with complex carbohydrates, vitamins, and calories. It kept the workforce alive. Without beer, the pyramids simply do not exist. But here is where everything you thought you knew about human history gets flipped entirely upside down. Remember the textbook story that humans started farming to bake bread and beer was just a happy accident? Patrick McGovern, an archaeobotanist and the world's leading expert on ancient alcohol, looks at the evidence from the Natufians and Göbekli Tepe and proposes a radical new theory. It's called the beer before bread hypothesis. Think about bread. Making bread from wild, undomesticated grass is a nightmare. You have to harvest tiny seeds, painstakingly grind them into a fine powder by hand, invent an oven, figure out leavening, and bake it. The calorie payoff for a nomad barely justifies the immense labor. But beer? Beer is easy. You throw crushed grain into a pot of water, let it sit in the sun, and the natural yeast in the air does all the heavy lifting. And the psychological payoff? It's massive. McGovern and a growing number of scientists argue that humanity didn't settle down and endure the back-breaking labor of agriculture just to eat a slightly softer version of grain. They settled down because they wanted a reliable, endless supply of alcohol. Farming was hard, but catching a buzz? That made the misery of agricultural labor worth it. Civilization didn't invent alcohol. Alcohol invented civilization. Look at the modern world around you. The sprawling cities, the towering skyscrapers, the endless fields of wheat and barley, the complex social networks we navigate every day. All of it traces its roots back to a primal biological urge, born on a humid forest floor 10 million years ago. A mutation that taught our ancestors that the scent of fermentation meant survival, energy, and a strange, comforting warmth in a terrifying world. So the next time you sit at that dimly lit bar, the next time you raise a glass with your friends, or crack open a cold one after a long, exhausting week, you aren't just having a drink. You are participating in the oldest, unbroken ritual in human history. The process has been refined. The ingredients are cleaner. The glass is nicer. But the impulse? That impulse is ancient. We didn't just discover alcohol. It made us who we are.